Why don't we go around the table, starting with you, Esther? What matters to you this time around?
In this election, my number one issue was crime. The Liberal anti-victim soft-on crime policies have allowed offenders to be on the streets, and this has impacted my family. My aunt was murdered. Her alleged killer is a repeat offender who was free because there was no mandatory minimum sentencing in place when he committed his previous violent crime in 2022. We still haven't found her body. Dealing with it's been super hard, but had a lot of support from my friend Chris D'Entremont, and I received a call from Pierre Poilievre, and this kind of given us some hope. But yeah, it's been a really difficult thing to deal with.
And you're talking about MP Chris D'Entremont.
From Acadia, yeah.
All right.
Formerly West Nova.
For me, I guess I like general social issues are things that matter to me the most. So women's rights, women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights. Also things such as housing. I mean, being a student is expensive in general. I think we can all agree on that. So to have to pay for school and also housing is something that a lot of students have to stress about every month.
And Sterling, for you?
Well, if you'd have asked me that a couple of months ago, I would have probably said cost of living issues. It feels like a lot of the problems we're dealing with in our country have to do with the cost of living, whether it's housing or high grocery prices or tariffs from more hostile nations than they've been in the past. Recently, though, we've seen a lot more hostility from the American president, President Trump, threats to our sovereignty. And I think that is a growing issue, not only in the eyes of the Canadian public, but in my eyes as well.
I think that social issues are really important, especially when you look at what's happening in America and the more authoritarian shift that you're seeing and kind of less of a respect for people's human rights over there. But definitely housing as well. Like being from Halifax, I've seen the way the housing crisis has changed the city. Social services and community outreach and things like that is super important to me.
Have you heard a party that's really speaking to you?
At this point, I don't truly feel that there's a party that's speaking to young voters, especially on the two main parties. A lot of people are concerned about large-scale issues like the United States. And I really do think that many politicians are able to use that to their advantage to kind of get people to sway their votes. They're not as concerned about what they would maybe consider as smaller social issues, things that maybe are going on in communities themselves. They're more worried about the international and getting their federal vote.
We should get back to looking at the issues like affordability and crime. I think that the U.S. issue is super important, but it's just one of many issues that we should be focusing on in this election.
I do feel like similarly that the parties aren't necessarily targeting young people, just particularly given it's not a super strong demographic voting wise. Politicians right now kind of taking a more centrist approach and pandering a little bit more to kind of middle-aged and older voters. You're seeing things on housing, but it's more about buying a home. And young people like us at this age, we're more looking at renting and things like that. So the affordability issues are different when you're looking at younger people.
I think what you're seeing in this election, which is interesting, is that a lot of the attention to social issues has been paid on the conservative side. And that is obviously a party which is a little bit more hostile towards social progressives, talking about terms like wokeism and social progressivism, painting it in a negative light. In my opinion, a lot of those issues are manufactured issues, which are meant to distract from the real point, which right now looks like threats to our sovereignty, threats to our economic status as one of the premier countries in the world. That's not to say that these issues aren't important, but I'm glad that the new Liberal leader is not focusing on it primarily, just given how big of an issue our economic standing is right now.
Have you seen any direct attempts to talk to young voters to get that turnout up?
So our politics association had hosted a small panel with our current MP, Cody Blois. And he was pretty keen to come in and talk to us young voters. Unfortunately, we did not have a great turnout. I think maybe there was 10 of us and the whole campus was invited. Maybe the rest of the campus feels disconnected, kind of like Anne was saying. If you don't understand the electoral system and you don't feel as though your vote matters, why kind of take the time? Kind of seems to be the stance that I understand.
The amount of students there was completely overshadowed by the amount of community members there. And I guess that just goes to show how disengaged youth are with the political process, even if they're engaged online all the time, while the older people in the room are more willing to get out there and vote and do their civic duties.
I would suggest, though, that there is more engagement on the ground. I would just say I'm working on my local campaign, and we have a large youth presence on our team. I didn't see that. I worked the last 2 elections, and the youth presence was a lot smaller in those elections. We've got a lot more people interested in getting out, getting on the ground, and really hitting doors for my team. So I do think that when affordability and issues like that begin to impact voters, that young voters are more apt to get out and get involved.
I describe this as being potentially the most consequential election in a very long time. What's at stake, would you say?
Well, I think public safety is at stake, affordability, and obviously our national sovereignty. That's something I think that it's a huge factor in the election. It makes me really happy to see people celebrating Canada again. Canada Day was canceled just a few years ago, and now people are saying that they're proud to be Canadian again. That makes me happy.
Beforehand, it was kind of, you knew where it was going to swing for sure. The Liberals were not very popular in the polls. But as of now, with Mark Carney being able to, I think kind of like Anne said, kind of position himself more as like a centrist, you don't really know what's going to happen now, I suppose. I mean, I'm sure we're all looking at the news every morning trying to figure it out. But until voting day, we'll never really know.
I think it's been interesting to see the NDP kind of move away from the top of the polls or from the middle. They're not really a suitable party anymore, not looking super strong, and they were definitely talking to young people more than the other parties. So I think that shift has been dramatic, definitely. And I do think with Trump in office for the next 4 years, you definitely want someone leading the country who's going to be able to manage that sort of chaos.
A lot of people have been saying that Pierre Poilievre and his rhetoric and the way he does politics is remarkably similar to the way that the American president does it. Whether you believe it or not, that's not my business, but that's how people feel. That's how the general public is understanding Pierre Poilievre. So a couple of months ago, I would have been very worried about this kind of American style of politics where they're very combative and very polarizing was starting to bleed into our political system. Now you're seeing Trump, he's blaming Canadians for all our problems and
All their problems.
all their problems, right? And so now I think it's become something very different. It's about being Canada, being our own country, and trying to fix our economy so that we can stand on our own feet, which has been a very, very interesting thing to watch unfold, I think.
If I was speaking to a young voter, I would say, yes, it's so important to look at each party's platform, but to also look at the candidate you're voting for. You're not voting for the prime minister candidate, you're voting for your local MP. So understand the difference between our provincial and federal elections, understand the system.
Yeah, I would say get informed. Really look at the issues yourself. Don't rely on social media posts. Look at the party's platforms yourself and see which party most closely aligns to your values and be part of the democratic process that we're so fortunate to have in this country.
And also recognizing that a party platform is more of a pitch, and you want to look into the party a little deeper and see what they might do that's not necessarily outlined in that policy, see where their beliefs are and where a majority of their caucus stands on
History
certain
of
issues.
past votes, for example.
Yeah, definitely looking at voting history, what kind of legislation they've introduced, things of that nature, I think are super important.
If you spent any more than a half an hour in the past 3.5 years talking about politics, complaining about politics, what you'd like to see better, it takes less time than that to vote. And if you feel that your vote isn't worth your time, I would encourage you to encourage your friends to vote rather than just not voting yourself. It's remarkably consequential